webinar. This is all about 3 things to consider before becoming a Christian counsellor. And not just any counsellor, but a Christian counsellor. And we're going to be covering, the AIFC team will be covering the different things, different questions. So, over the years, people ask questions, they have queries, they have concerns, they have, sometimes they might be hesitant in some area, or, they just need a little bit of a boost of confidence to take a step. This is what this webinar is about, is all the considerations before making that decision. And as Christians, we are, prayerful and considerate with our decisions, but we're also people who take steps of faith. And, if there's a call for us to do something, we're willing to step out the boat and do a bit of walking on water. So as we've got the panel here today, so we've already gone through that before this slide. So that's been covered. So we'll keep moving along here. So one of the big things is about why are you here? So, maybe you've been thinking about Christian counselling for a long time. Maybe it's something that you just saw something on Facebook and, you were like, oh, I'm just a little bit curious about it. I'm not ready now, but maybe in the future. Maybe you're ready to go. You've been wanting to do this for a long time, 2020 is a year, and you just want to get that information to go ahead. Maybe you're uncertain and, you haven't studied for a while. Some people lose their confidence. They might have been out of the workforce because they haven't been, they've been parenting children and they're wondering what their next, stage of life is going to be. There's all different reasons why people are here. And this webinar, we're facilitating the team to be able to speak into things that you need to consider at whatever stage you're at in the journey. And the other thing as well is this is about calling. So there's a big need in Christendom and the culture for Christian counsellors, and Nick will be able to contribute to that in a moment. But there's a big need, and that need, obviously, the church plays its role, the local church that we're a part of, but the local church and the pastors are one part of that that fulfillment of that call. The wider body of Christ, all believers, as it talks about in Ephesians, are there to be equipped to do this work. And the heart of AIFC, from the experience I've had with them, is about equipping all believers to be able to help this great need of, if I say any of these problems, you probably think of one person going through it. Marriage problems, family problems, trauma, depression, anxiety, emotional, mental health issues, addictions. There's a range of problems people have, even as Christians, when they become a believer in Christ, and they want to get free. So the heart of the AIFC is about seeing people set free and have their fullness in their relationship with God, and that being supported by Christian counsellors to help them get there as a part of that journey. So this is really about calling. And when we first did this webinar, it was a few years ago, but the scripture came up about, Esther and, being called to the kingdom for such a time as this. And one of the things that really resonated with people was like, they didn't really consciously think in a way that I want to be a counsellor. They had an unction from the Holy Spirit drawing them into this type of vocation. And I might just, before we get started, maybe just from the CEO position, and I know Mark would be friends with, I think it's Mark McCrindle, and all the data around the need in the society and the opportunity for Christians to play that supportive role in becoming counsellors. So just before we get started, Nick, how big is this need? And, why do you think Christians should be the ones to service that need in society? Oh, I can't hear you. You might have to unmute yourself.
That was some of my best work there that you didn't get to hear.
Okay.
Thanks, mate. I think there's that, if we look at it from 2 ways, there's what's going on in our culture and the changes that are happening in our culture, and we observe that, we feel it, and there's a lot of data about it. You mentioned McCrindle and others who do the research in this area, and we also did some recently where the National Church Life Survey, we went out and asked church, there was over 1,000 church leaders, pastors, etc., around questions around how they're going and some of those issues you mentioned that are the real pain points in our culture, and also more generally about mental health in the church. And what it found is that there's an increase, the data tells us that, there's an increased sort of pain and burden that we're all feeling with that, and that we've experienced it, or we know someone who has or is. And also that sense of, well, I don't really know what to do with it. Some of these issues are quite complex. And so then that sort of points to that other side of this is People being skilled and equipped. You said something I think is really important. We have a strong view and advocacy of every believer needs to be equipped in this area to some extent. That doesn't mean everyone's going to go and do a master's and become a, fully fledged accredited counsellor, etc. But you might. But it means getting equipped to some extent so we can engage and walk alongside people, because this is something that affects us all, particularly if you look at the health and well-being of our young people these days. And a lot of the markers are pointing to these sort of things and trends increasing or diminishing. And so it's not to be negative, it's not to be afraid. It's to go in with an open heart, but also not just good intentions. It's about being equipped in the right way. And so that's part of our hope today. We can just unpack some of that with you as to what does that really mean? How does that look for me? How do I know what that means and take this next step if it's something that you feel called to do? But again, I just underline, we do believe that every believer to some extent, given this is the times that we are in, it's important to be equipped in the right ways so we can engage and get alongside people. And I think it was Oswald Chambers said that the place where the gospel and culture intersect changes every generation. I think there's a great opportunity for where the gospel intersects with our culture now in terms of people helping skills, because our communities are more fractured than they used to be. And so they would traditionally take care of these sort of things, and they're not as able to now. So they're just some thoughts. Could go on a lot more, but I think I might stop there.
No, that's great. Thank you, Nick. Now we're going to get into the meat of the webinar, and there's 3 stages to this webinar. The first part is about suitability. So that's for you. If you're thinking, hey, should I do this? Am I the right person for this? We've got Susan there to speak into that particular need. Then the second part is around finding the right course pathway. So obviously AIFC does courses, and but looking broadly at courses, what are the best options? What are the best approaches? How do you tackle that? How do you make those right decisions? A bit of a bird's eye view when it looks to getting trained to become a Christian counsellor. And the last part of this is about career and calling, really, about where does that go? So it's nice to study, it's nice to do a course, it's nice to want to help the society, but we all live in a culture where we need to survive as well. So some people are, lay counsellors, where they just do this for helping and contributing to the local church as a volunteer. But we're finding a lot of people are going, there's a big need in our society. We could actually be trained up to become professional counsellors for the church and for, the unsaved society, and that can actually become a vocation. And because of the increase of mental health problems, that need is growing stronger. We've seen through history, Christians have always pioneered an area in the health industries, and right now, one of the ones that needs to get pioneered is a mental, emotional health, relationships, trauma, all of these issues that we're being confronted with on a daily, weekly, monthly basis by all sorts of people, wherever we are, work, family, church, and so on. So let's get started. So it's 3 little chapters, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end. So the first one, we'll get Susan on here, and just got a couple of things to start to prompt this. So thanks, Susan. Susan, one of the big questions people have found, and we do a lot of talking to people as well with our involvement with AIFC, people ask this question, am I suitable? Am I the right person to do this? And that's one of their considerations. How would you respond to that question?
Yeah, well, Jordan, I guess I'd say that it doesn't matter what we're doing in life. We all offer counsel to some people at some time. And sometimes it's good counsel. I know I spent many years, sadly, in pastoral care in the church. And when I look back at some of the things I used to say, I need for them to stop talking so I can get them scripture. I knew it helped them. I feel quite horrified. And what I've done in this course is learned how to listen. So how do I know if it's for me? I think if you've got ears, you're able to hear. If you're in a position where perhaps people find themselves talking to you, or you find yourself somebody that people come to. Perhaps you are someone who likes to watch people grow in their potential. And I'll go back, prior to being equipped, I used to be somebody that people wanted to talk to. I just would find people telling me their story, but I didn't respond well. And I didn't know I didn't respond well until I learned how to respond well. I guess, you know, are you somebody that you find yourself, I think, Jordan, you mentioned it before, somebody's saying something to you and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I actually don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. Or you've just got this innate desire, because you want to make people feel better. You want to support them in what they're doing. So if you answer yes to any of those, or when you think about those things, are you someone people like to talk to? Do you want to see people grow into their potential? Do you wish sometimes that you knew what to say in a situation? And like if you answer yes to any of them, then I would think that positions you to be suitable. And just one last thing I want to say too to that. In Acts, we read about the words that David served his generation. And we want to be servants. I mean, we're called to be servants, to be the one who serves. And Acts is the very word is all about action.
Yeah.
And we want to be a people who serve our generation. So that's a great desire. I think we need to add to that, we want to serve them well. So we need to be equipped to serve them well.
As you're talking, I think of when it talks about Jesus was moved with compassion. So you might be someone who, as just you mentioned, you might just see the need and you want to help them, but you have hesitancy and fear, and you don't feel equipped for that, but you're being led to be moved with compassion. Susan, if someone's really feeling that prompting, they've got that anguish, because in a way, some of these issues we're mentioning is almost like the big white elephant in the room. And unfortunately, pastors are the ones who, you know, they have a teaching role, but they play this pastoral care role. And we see pastors, and the data shows that are getting burnt out all the time. So there's a need for everyday people to step into this role. If someone's really being moved right now with this, what are some of those little decisions they can make to help move them forward?
Great question. Well, I would encourage you to speak to somebody who you respect spiritually, somebody who knows you, who has your best interests at heart, and run it alongside them. And again, if I can use my own example, I wasn't looking to be a counsellor. In fact, I never in my wildest dreams did I want to be a counsellor ever. But I did always want to help people. And I came about this because, and I didn't actually think it was God nudging me, because we can talk about God nudging us, but I think if I asked, what have we got, 102 people here, how many times do you feel really confident in that it's God calling you to something until you've stepped into that space? And so I that's why I suggest talk to somebody who knows you well. I spoke to my sister, because there were some women had come, and I ran out of anything I knew to help them. And so I spoke with her, and she said, you know, you should really do some study in that. And so at that stage, did I think God was leading me? No. I thought I was doing something practical to assist people. I look back, and in fact, I wasn't long into it. And I absolutely knew that God led me. But I did seek spiritual direction, and obviously my own relationship with God, talking to God. So I guess they would be some pointers I would give, Jordan.
Now that's good, because sometimes when you look at the whole journey and the course and your commitment, I'm sure it will look very intimidating. But sometimes you just have those little decisions you make, and they're the ones you can handle, and you could get overwhelmed by all of the bigger ones later on. But it sounds like you just have to talk to someone, make these little steps. You could have a big call in Christian counseling, but maybe that's not on you yet, because you just need to have that conversation with someone and maybe get started, you know? So it makes perfect sense. What about this thing, Susan, about people who a little bit of lost their confidence. They might have been out of the workforce, or they haven't been using their gifts so much in the church as they have. They might have had some possibly even bad experiences, getting exposed to things that they weren't prepared for, and they're feeling a little bit inadequate. How would you encourage them to just a bit of a confidence booster in God, not in ourselves? Because inadequacy is actually a good place when it's God going to strengthen you. What would you speak to someone who's in that position?
I guess I'd say, why not have a go? Look, and I'm sure Steve and Sally could speak to this as well. In our positions of being people who work with students, the majority, well, I don't know if majority is the right perhaps stat, but certainly there are a lot of people who feel inadequate, and I certainly was one of them. We come in, we feel anxious, we haven't studied for a while, as you said, and some of us, and this was my story, I was just terrified of failing, and it's that faith. I mean, faith is scary. If it wasn't, we'd all be great at exercising our faith. But I guess I would say to you, in spite of what you feel, because faith isn't about our feelings. And this is where we go back to, I've spoken to somebody, God, I don't understand it. I'm not sure, but I think maybe you're leading me this way. And so in spite of what I feel, I'm going to just step out in obedience. And I think obedience pushes us through our feelings, because our feelings will look, honestly, my feelings would have kept me in my house. They would never have got me to go to this course. And so, yeah, our feelings are loud, but I would encourage you, speak to somebody, speak to God. I often actually have people speak to other students who have been in that same journey. We don't want to be kept back because of our fear. So in spite of fear, I encourage you to, if you have that sense that God's leading you, to step out in obedience. And honestly, Jordan, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
Seriously, what's the worst that can happen?
Well, what I'm hearing you say, Susan, in a biblical framework is get out of the boat. So, faith is the reverse of fear. So how do you get rid of fear? Take a bit of a step. And it could just be those small steps that I think you're saying, those little practical ones, just to encourage people in their faith. And you're not committing to anything, just talking to someone, talking to, say, a course advisor from the AFC. Yes. They're just little steps just to get the thing started, and makes perfect sense. And as well, I think, for listening to what you're saying, there's bad risks, like unhealthy risks. The parable where a person tried to build a house and they didn't have enough material and they took wrong risk. But then there's the other one, which is you're sitting on your talents and
yes.
a master one day. So that, it's like, why didn't you take any risks? So I think, unhealthy risks, healthy risks, take some steps. Really good, solid points there, Susan.
Can I just jump in, Jordan? Because I think I just have a sense this is perhaps going to speak to somebody.
Yeah.
You've said get out of the boat, but I also think that there's some people here that need to hear that you stay in the boat. You're actually already on this journey of deciding, and you're on this journey. You have this sense that God's wanting you to be equipped, and in the storm, the disciples stayed in the boat, and Jesus got in, and everything was calm. And to have that sense that God is with me, that I cannot go anywhere that He's not with me, and God's for us. God believes in us, so God believes in you. And just last thing, Psalm 37, verse 30, and in the Passion Translation, it says, "God lovers make the best counselors." Did you answer? Their words possess wisdom and are right and trustworthy. So if out of the 104 people visiting, if you are God lovers, then regardless of whether you become a counsellor or just get equipping to counsel people or to hear well, listen well, you're going to be one who makes the best counsellor. That's the word.
That's great. Yeah, God's with you. So nothing to fear. Really, really great encouragement right there. Just, I know this is about counselling courses, but this is actually a bit of ministry as well. So it's very good. Let's move on to the next section now. We'll get Sally up. And this next section is about courses. So, you obviously go through this process of considering your suitability, making those decisions, looking at the big journey, but getting some counsel, taking some steps, knowing that God's with you. And then you're like, I'm going to consider this. I'm going to explore this. So obviously to do that, it's not just about stepping out free-nilly and not having anyone backing. You need to be equipped and that training and that grounding to be able to do these types of professions, because it's one of those professions you can't just, anyone can do. You've got to have a level of training to be a professional counsellor. So this next part is about the courses and choosing the right course. Now, obviously AFC have specific courses, but this is also looking at, this section is about looking at courses in general, about how do you fit that in and what are the right ones, and do you go flexible, full-time, part-time, those types of questions that people ask on a regular basis. So we've got Sally here. So one of the first questions here is really, what are the, kind of 101 really, what are the options people need to look at when looking to getting equipped and trained up to become a professional counsellor? Over to you, Sally.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. And I think the key word there is that you've said a professional counsellor. So at AFC, we offer short courses as well as our accredited courses. And there's a plethora of courses out there that students can choose from. And I think it's, discerning what is it that God's calling you to? Is it coming alongside people in a pastoral care way? Is God calling you to be better equipped to help your friends and family, and you're just looking at yourself as well? Or are you looking at going on that full journey and being a professional counsellor? So I think just taking a step first to think about, why are you drawn to a course in counselling first? Because that will lead your decision going forward. So, I mean, if you type in Diploma of Counseling or counselling courses on Google, there's going to be many, many, many different sites that come up. And I think something you do need to really consider is, one, your faith. Is the Christian side of things important to you? And as we've just heard from Susan, we can't do anything in our own understanding. We can try, but many a times we're going to stumble and fall and, potentially hurt people. All good intention, but we just may not be fully equipped. So if you are passionate about Christ and your faith, then I would really encourage you to look at the Christian courses out there, with us being one of those courses. The second real important point is making sure that the courses that you're looking for are accredited. I've heard, unfortunately, many stories of students, when I've been on the phone in course advisory sessions, they have started a course or have completed a course, sadly, and it's not accredited with the peak counselling bodies. So it would be horrible to get to the end of a 12-month course and actually find out that you can't join with the Australian Christian Counselling Association or the Australian Counselling Association, so ACA or CCAA, as a professional member, and it would just be devastating. So making sure that you really check the courses out there. Some of the courses look great on paper when you look at the cost and you think, oh yeah, that's a cheaper option, but unfortunately you may not be accredited. So vital that you do your homework to see, firstly, is it going to meet your needs, and is the course accredited? So nationally accredited and accredited with the peak counselling associations. So that'd be the two main ones, Jordan. I mean, there's lots of different things. Making sure that there's an inward focus as well, not just the outward focus of upskilling and learning those skills of listening and helping and to say what to say and not what to say. But as counsellors, we really need to look at ourselves first. And so there should be a strong focus in any course that you choose to have that inward focus, because if we're not right, we can't actually take people past where we are. So we need to find our own healing and restoration And as you know, that comes purely through Christ and that real deep heart-hitting healing. So we at AFC in the Diploma of Counseling, we actually spend a fair chunk of the course looking at ourselves, and that's self-care, seeking that spiritual discernment from people around us, and looking at our relationship with Christ, because we need us right and have a really strong foundation before we can go out and help other people. So that would be the three key things that I would say to really do your homework in when choosing a course.
Yeah. And just as a remote involved with AFC, it's, yes, they do training, but they're really a community as well. It's not like you can just go to a place and you can do training and no one talks to you, where there's a strong sense of community, prayer, flourishing, and support. One of the questions, Sally, as well that came up, and some really good points you've just stated there, just as a broad view of making sure it's, you know, the right course and it's, you know, accredited and all those different things. One of the questions that we've found that comes up a lot is around life, right? So, you know, you're wanting to study and you're looking at your calendar and you're looking at a course and you're going to go, how are these things going to reconcile? So what are some of the things around bringing a course into your already, you know, the life you don't have much bandwidth on at the moment? What's some practical things people can look at when looking at a course if they're in that particular situation?
Yeah, great question, Jordan. And I think, you know, we're all busy, and this time of year, I don't know if anyone else is like me, you've sort of looked up and went, oh my goodness, there's 2 weeks till Christmas, and how did that happen? So, you know, life is busy, but understanding if you're being called to this, you know, one, God's going to make a way, but two, we need to look at the practical side of things. So picking a course that really fits into your lifestyle. So some of our flexible options are that we've got online learning. So we have a teaching week, and then we've got a 7 to 8 week term where you actually can choose the times that you study. So if you've got young kids at home and, you know, it's between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock as nap time, then that's when you can jump on the computer. Then that works from our end, but it also works for you as well. Or if you're full time and you've got time on the weekends, and you can do that study as well. So our course actually is very flexible in the time that you can choose to study. We do have set due dates, but it's just understanding that there's a lot of space in between that term. So again, if you're looking at courses, look at the structure of how that's laid out. Some courses open, there's just no structure, and that might work for some people, but I think in my experience and for me, I really do like a little bit of boundaries around, so I've got something to work towards, so I'm not just sort of left to my own devices. And then on the flip side of that, other courses do have very structured classes and time frames and very set deadlines. So it's, again, working out what works for you. I know many of our students, young families is a big thing. So working around that flexible time really is important. Yeah.
And one of the observations as well that's come out, I think, because I've worked with other training organisations, but AIFC is heading towards is, you know, they have people have online, and then they have, you know, you physically turn up, and both have their advantages. One's flexible, one's more personal. They're bringing those things together, so you get the best of both worlds. So you've got the full flexibility, and you've also got people you can actually physically meet and see. And as Sally said, like, if you don't have a structure, you're not going to do anything. You need some accountability and discipline in that. So it is the perfect combo from a lot of the training groups that I've worked with in the past. And I think they've really found that balance. Just moving on and just being a little bit of aware of time, but I think we need to spend a bit of time on this, Sally, with you, is about the pathway. So we've got a diagram here. And one of the things that AIFC have evolved in is that pathway towards a master's. So one of the big questions is, when looking at the pathway, is what do I need to do to get some kind of job or move into maybe my own business? And what's the minimum and what's the maximum, and what's the benefits between that scale over time? Because looking at this pathway, you could go, oh, I don't think I can do that. But once again, taking Susan's point of that, you know, taking the journey, how can people reconcile this pathway based on not just studying outcomes, but also that what's needed for employment or having their own practice in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. So I guess, firstly, let just me say that if you're thinking about doing the course, you know, you don't have to go all the way to the masters. Many students come just for that, their own personal benefit or professional development or upskilling in the job that you have. So when you look at this slide, don't feel like you've got to be in for the next 5 years. There are, you know, bite-sized pieces. And the first one is really the Diploma of Counseling. So that is our entry course. So anyone who hasn't got an undergraduate degree in either theology or mental health would start at the diploma. And that's, as I've said, all your basic core counselling skills and that inward focus to start off with. And that is a vet or a vocational course. So there's a lot of focus on the practical. You're not going to do big essays or anything else, because I'm yet to write an essay for any of my clients. It's all about the practical. And then that we have actually got a really unique pathway in that we've paired up with Stirling Theological College, who work under the University of Divinity. And we actually offer all the way through to masters in a combination of vocational education and higher education. So the Advanced Diploma and the Bachelor of Counselling actually fall under Stirling College, Stirling Theological College, and they're higher ed. So, but we've tried to make it really as seamless as possible in that there's a lot of skills work and practical elements within those advanced diplomas and bachelors as well. And then if you're still in for the journey, you can go on and do our graduate diploma in counselling and integrated psychotherapy, where you're really taking all those core counselling skills and integrating more the theology side of things and bringing it back into a really holistic understanding of Christian counselling. And then if you're really keen, you can go on and do the Masters of Counselling as well. So it is quite a professional pathway. And I think the key important part there is that if you're wanting to be a professional counsellor, you do need to aim for being a registered member with either CCAA, so they're the Christian Counselling Association, or ACA Level 3. So at the Diploma of Counselling, you come out as a Level 1 counsellor with ACA, which basically means that you can call yourself a counsellor. But generally, we do find that students want to go on and get further study after that Diploma of Counselling. And it's at Level 3 that things like all your private health insurance kick in, the National Disability Service, you can get funding for that. So the majority of counsellors really aim to have a bachelor or a master's of counsellors, because that's where you can get the funding. And that's where many, many doors open for employment opportunities at those 2 points.
And just if someone's looking at that saying, well, I'm not sure if I'm quite ready for a bachelor, but diploma, what are some of those, does that entry point provide some level of employability, would you say?
Yeah, so I think Steve's going to talk more so around that, but yeah, certainly. I don't want to steal his thunder, but certainly, yes, that you can gain employment at the Diploma of Counselling. Yeah.
So this question of, and I'm putting the bird's eye view out here, and Steve's going to cover this in a moment. These are the big questions that we're finding people are asking. So we'll get on to this next section with Steve. And one thing I'll just intersect here between the next chapter is the course advisors. So, everyone's got a different situation, both practically, they've studied before, they're considering different levels, they've done this and they could do this and so on. The course advisors are people employed by the AIFC who can actually have an online virtual meeting with you at no cost to go through these types of questions and help you on your journey. So we'll be talking about that bit at the end, but if we're not covering everything here, that opportunity is coming right up. Now, obviously, this is actually the most exciting chapter, really, because it's like, well, training's nice, but where does this go? So choosing a career pathway. And we've got Steve here. And Steve, give us the big picture view on this, because I think there's a lot of different avenues and applications and journeys people can go on. But what's the 15,000 foot view of a career as a Christian counsellor?
Sure. I think it's important just to go back to Sally's point on the pathway that you see from the diploma, that you can actually start to work in counselling from having completed your diploma.
Okay.
And I'll unpack that a little bit more as we chat now. But certainly the pathway that lies there, there's various exit points, and it all depends on what you want to achieve. It all depends on your outcome. We've heard Sally use the word professional counsellor, and maybe what we need to do is introduce the other category, which we could broadly use the category pastoral counsellor. So professional and pastoral counselling, and you could perhaps include in pastoral counselling the category of lay counselling. But what I don't want to necessarily, when I use the word pastoral counselling, I don't want to exclude that it's just voluntary counselling. I don't want to imply that pastoral counselling is just voluntary counselling. And so I'll give an example from myself. I studied with AIFC back in 2005, 2006. I did the diploma, I did the advanced diploma, and that led me into employment. I was employed as a high school chaplain, as well as a counsellor at a church community counselling centre, and that was just off the back of those qualifications. And I would say that I was doing primarily pastoral counselling in the context that it was very community based, but it was a paid job for me. It wasn't simply a voluntary position that I was doing. Since then, I did go on and completed the AIC graduate diploma, and have also registered as a professional counsellor, and both with ACA and as well as CCAA at a clinical level, and have, alongside my pastoral work that I do and teaching work that I do, have a small private practice. And so for myself, I've experienced the pathway, and at the various kind of, different points where you can get off, I've experienced the pathway as a pastoral care counsellor in church context. I've experienced it as a chaplain working within a school community. And I've also more recently experienced it as a professional counsellor in the last number of years, being able to do private practice as a registered clinical counsellor.
Oh, wow.
And so there's certainly there's pathways, and it kind of depends on the outcome for where you want to get to.
Okay, so that's really helpful, especially transitioning from Sally and tying that all together. That was your particular situation, and that was really helpful to understand how you could be a pastoral counsellor and still be paid at that lower level. And then that journey you've been on is sure for the listeners and the watchers of this is quite confidence boosting in the fact that, it's not like you have to do that full pathway. There are opportunities that will come up as you go. But just, you've spoken to a lot of people, Steve, and obviously people who work with AIFC. What are some of the different scenarios outside of your situation, but other scenarios you've seen in terms of career and calling and applications of becoming a counsellor? And another question that we get asked a lot is the demand as well. So any kind of career pathway, you want to ensure that there's a demand for employment, for business, and so on. How do you validate that? So you can have confidence you're heading into a direction that, so if you do it on a pay track, it's going to end up somewhere.
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you a summary of, in terms of our graduate AIFC, the vocational outcomes over the years as we've tracked with our graduates and what's happening. So firstly, our graduates are equipped to work in both the Christian and secular context. Okay. It's kind of like, when Jesus says, you go the extra mile. You don't just go the 1 mile that's required of you, you go the extra mile. So we don't go, because we're Christian counsellors, we'll try to cut corners and we won't be qualified at an industry level. That's not our approach. The approach is we need to be qualified at exactly what the industry requires of us, which is why it's important that you want to be a registered counsellor, that you're part of a peak association body like ACA or CCAA. So in that sense, our training gets you equipped to deal with what the industry of counselling in the whole of Australia is dealing with.
Okay.
The extra mile is that the extra mile is you do it from a distinctly unapologetic Christian perspective. So our worldview is biblical, and that we understand mental health and we understand the process of helping through a biblical worldview. And so there is, in a sense, you doing what everybody else would do, but you're going that bit extra. There's that little bit more. So the process, there's no shortcuts. This isn't, if you want to have a quick cut the corner approach to learning, this isn't for you. This is if you want to do things properly, the right way, be properly equipped to be able to work and to serve God's kingdom with integrity. So that's important to say up front, as well as I was speaking about, we've been tracking the outcomes, and in total, there's over 80% of our graduates are working as in the related to counselling in some way or another. It's over 80% when you add all the different things together. And some of the vocational options that we've tracked with that are out there is people getting employed as counsellors. So actually, and there's various organisations that employ. I can share a few. So obviously pastoral care, so both within the church in a paid church capacity, pastoral care, as well as voluntary, small group leaders, different ways like that. Youth work, many have got involved in youth work. Many are employed as chaplains, and then private practice counsellor or support worker. And there's a range of organizations that employ counsellors. So if you go to a job search and you type in counsellor, it's not necessarily going to bring up all the potential jobs that are available for you. There's all sorts of other kinds of jobs that require you to be a counsellor. For example, there's family support centres and they have various roles. There's women's health centres. There's not-for-profit ministries, organisations, education, government agencies, refugee support centres, Indigenous community service. There's a range of different kinds of roles. Some of the roles titles are like drug and alcohol intake officer, counsellor, educator, community mental health worker, disability officer, clinical manager, case manager, refugee services, community worker. There's all these different kinds of roles that employ counsellors, and some of that employment will simply require you to have completed your Diploma of Counseling. Others of that would require you to have completed a degree, so the bachelor or any degree in the mental health services. So it kind of depends on that. To go back to your question about what's the employability looking like?
Yes.
The Australian government did employment projections, and they looked at what the projected employment growth by industry would be by November 2019, so just gone by. And the biggest sector was the healthcare and social assistance.
Wow.
In terms of projected employability, healthcare and social assistance came in at 20.9%. Education and training was 11.6%. Construction was 11.2%.
Wow.
Everything else was the biggest sector in terms of employability. When you then actually look at where registered counsellors work, and that is anyone with a diploma that's registered up, the healthcare and social assistance sector is 56.9% of where registered counsellors actually work. The education and training sector is another 31.7%. And then public administration and safety was 6.4%, and then there were other services.
Wow.
So it's certainly a growing sector, employment of counsellors, and essential to have a nationally recognised qualification that allows you to start to work in a variety of different options. So my take on our pathway is that just from the diploma onwards, you can be involved in professional work. You may not be a professional counsellor. You may be employed, say, for example, in a chaplaincy role or a youth care worker role. But to get to the point where you have your own private practice, where you can be employed as a professional counsellor, that would take, you would need to climb the ladder a little bit more in terms of your qualifications. And as Sally alluded to the ACA level 3 is where a lot of the benefits kicking with the private healthcare funding, and there's various initiatives that you can actually get funding a counsellor. So there's a lot of employment out there. You've kind of got to know where to look, and don't just do a job search that says counsellor, because you're probably going to find 10% of what actual jobs are out there.
That's really good. Yeah, it's like you go, Google counsellor. There's no counselling jobs, but you've just said so wide, and you might need to Google some of these other phrases. We're going to transition to the next stage, but I do have this question that has come up as well that I just wanted to quickly bring to the surface. You've got the church and you've got secular society, and we want to be helping the church, but the kingdom is about not just the church. Getting a qualification as a Christian counsellor and the employability of a secular organisation, is there any deterrence from that, or is it accepted because of the values of the Christian faith?
My quick answer to that is that if your qualification is approved by ACA, which would be the kind of peak body in terms of you talking a secular recognition, if your qualification is approved by ACA, that's what counts. So if you were to go to any employee and they saw, you've got this qualification, AIFC and Stirling Theological College, that must be Christian, and they discriminated against you, they're actually out of line. It's the peak industry body, ACA, would give credibility to the qualification in that context. And so your qualification would allow you. So even when you look at the actual qualification that you get, it's a Diploma of Counseling, a Bachelor of Counseling. It doesn't, it's not, you can't discriminate because it ticks all the boxes that are required. Which
means you need to have a credible, RTO organisation doing this, not just anyone.
Yes.
That's really good. That's quite helpful for some of the questions that have been coming in, because that one does come up a lot. And we can't, we need to help the church, but we need to help the world and be salt and light as well. So to still be employable in those contexts with the training that's provided by AIFC is really good. We might just transition now, but thanks, Steve. That was very insightful and really helpful for the types of questions people have been asking, and also to Sally and Susan around those other areas of suitability and the course pathway, and that diagram really does bring that clarity around that. Now I'm going to bring Nick on here. He's disappeared. His video's off, but I presume he's there. I think he is. But before we transition to the, here he comes. There we are. There's the CEO. He was probably doing a report or some kind of cash flow forecast.
No, I just hadn't clicked my buttons. So habit.
So before we transition about the course advisory sessions, and that's very key for the 116 people on this webinar right now, is the course advisory sessions, which we're about to discuss. Before we do that, reflecting on everything that was said, and all the different things about pathways and suitability and the community of AIFC and the blended model, there's a lot of unique points about the AIFC. How would you say, as the CEO, you've made a decision to try to serve that approach in the best of your ability?
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. And there's a lot really well said by Susan, Sally, and Steve. So I'm bound to miss something here, but we'll have a crack at it. Just some of the big ticket items, I think, around the decision-making thought process about, is this suitable and right for me? And that process of discernment very much involves, who are these people and what are they about? So I think it's important that we talked about, what's AIFC like? What are we like as an organisation and as people? That we may not have mentioned, we've been around for over 25 years, and people who have been on the AIFC journey have traditionally been through, studied, practiced, and have a heart for getting alongside others who are undertaking that journey. So you're jumping into something with people who have been on the journey themselves. So we have to satisfy all the things that, you know, we're kind of regulated by everybody. I mean, there's the federal government, the Department of Education, there's ASQA, and there's all the finance side and the ASIC side and the nationally registered training, so accredited nationally, ACA, CCAA that you've heard. I'm bound to be missing some of those. There's others.
You're not-for-profit as well, aren't you?
With the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission, the ACNC. I just see them as all these little different logos that we have to have and have stamped on our organisation. But we endeavour to do that for a lot of reasons, is to be, as it was said very well in the webinar, salt and light, and be a Christ-centred, Bible-based people and organisation, very spirit-filled and led, and the way that infuses into all of our courses. So we don't just sprinkle Bible verses over really what is secular teaching. It's much more infused into the foundation of each unit and each course, and probably more importantly than that, each person who's teaching it. So that's really important, but it's also to be important to be in the world. And so having these other accreditations and being excellent in terms of standards and regulations and meeting and exceeding those is equally important, so that our students and alumni can step out and practice in whatever form they feel called and led to do. And that when they step out of AIFC and with our partner organisations with Sterling, they've got that ticket to say, well, I want to do this and I'm now able to. I want to do this and I'm not only trained and equipped, but I've actually got the accreditation or the ticket is clipped to be able to move into whatever space they want to. And that's really important. So we do both. It's a both and.
Yeah.
And we're very specialised in this, I think is the thing to do. We don't offer courses in other random things. We very much specialise in training and equipping people. If you have a look at our mission statement, transform lives, flourishing relationships, change communities through Christian counselling and equipping people for life. So we don't offer 20 or 30 different courses. We really stick to our knitting and are quite niche in that way. But that also allows us to really grow and be very good in that regard. Though we have been diversifying into some other different but quite related areas, which I'll touch on in a moment.
Okay.
Yeah, so the accredited side, we think that mix between vocational education and higher ed is really important. That's really quite new. You won't see that a lot, but it's aimed at giving our students the best of both worlds, that really hands-on practical and the theory. And for those who want to get the degree or masters in that regard, as Steve and Sally touched on as well. Quite high levels of support, and I would encourage you, if you're making those decisions around who should I go with, just be mindful of some of the ones that are priced. You want to get the best bang for your buck, but watch out for some of the ones that are quite low price, because what often happens is you'll pay $5,000 and you get sent a big pack in the post or to log into, and 2 phone calls a year, and you're kind of on your own. And it's also important, I think, to the kind of level of support you're getting, really interrogate that, and also that you can do a lot to help people with mind and body, but if you're not addressing it from a spiritual side, and by that I mean from a Holy Spirit side, then there's this massive part of life that's just missing. So we really emphasize that and walk in that way. And we respect that that's not for everybody, and people's beliefs are different, but we're also unapologetic that that's what we're about.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. And as Steve touched on, there's great outcomes for our students in terms of vocation and next steps. And I could tell you about all wonderful things our students say and satisfaction rates and all that sort of stuff, and they are very good, but I won't bore our guests with all that sort of data.
No, that's really good. And just being separate from AIFC, the two things that really stand out to me is that they're very missional. So it's not just about, a training organization, just they do training programs where it's very a missional thing for the AIFC. They're not for profit. They're not a business. They're out there to see lives changed. And the biggest one that I would say that's probably strongest than I've seen from any training group is the community. It's a Christian community. And when you're doing a journey like this, you you need to be connected to something a bit bigger where there's people supporting and helping you. And they even have pastoral care like within the, counseling courses when it's needed. So it's taking that journey with other believers. And everything that Nick said is completely true. And all the testimonials and videos on the website will validate that. And they're not ones to, beat their chest, but they don't need to, because there's a lot of references of people who have validated everything that they're saying. And I'm a little bit neutral in this. So, I'm separate, so I can say that's definitely the case, and the reputation that they have across the country. Now, I'm just being aware of time, and everyone on here, there's one thing that's very critical we want to address for you who are on here right now, and then we'll transition to a time of Q&A, and that will go on for, we can open it up for, up to a half an hour if you want to be around. So the critical thing is about the decision. Oh, actually, one last thing just before we get there is they have put together a platform called My Christian Counsellor. So, long term, fast forward, you want to become a counsellor. They're building technology. They've got innovation around connecting people in the society who need counselling with counsellors. And there's going to be more training around what this is and how that works. But they're not just a training organisation is really the point. They're creating business support for people wanting to start business practices.
Tools.
Tools.
The tools for you to use, yeah.
Tools to use. And also, we're involved with this, is helping find people on, say, the internet looking for counselling with counsellors. So it's more holistic. To call them an RTO would be an understatement. It's really a hub of, flourishing counsellors in the church and the society. But the critical thing I wanted to get to was if you look at your phone and see the date, we're in December, that's stating the obvious. But the reason why I raise that is because 2020 is typically, your next opportunity to look at what you want to do next year. So there's no pressure on any of this right now in terms of making a decision for a course. AIFC are very encouraging careful consideration and prayer. And because of that, one thing they like to do is to actually speak to you. So if you do have questions, so you might be going, is this for me? Or, how do I get started? Or, they said something on the webinar, but I wasn't quite sure about that. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of those questions, and we'll cover some of it in the webinar, but they're very personal in their approach, and they have absolutely no problem speaking to people who aren't even clients yet. So what this is called a course advisor. And a course advisor, you could probably call them a course and career advisor, because they can talk about your gifts and talents and where they fit in the overall journey, but it's primarily around the courses. And there is the next intake happening, and all the dates are online coming up. January, February is that period of closing that off. And the reason why I raise this is because now's the time to make those decisions and to have those conversations. And these are the steps. So basically, if you're someone who wants to start the process, not fully commit, but you want to start exploring further from the webinar, this is what you would do. The first thing you'd do is you'd book a course advisory session, which I'll put the link up in a moment, and they'll talk about the things we just spoke about. The second thing is you submit an application. So based on that, you'll say, yes, no, or later. If it is yes, then there's a simple application process that you go through to determine whether you're the right fit for the course, and they'll review that application and support you through the process. And we have Emmy on here as well, who's part of that team in terms of those applications and running that through. One little tip there is to just keep on top of it. So if you do the application, I know it's very easy to get busy and to forget about it, but it's not that hard to fill it out. Like, it's a very quite simple form. You will have to you'll get an email of all the things you need to fill out that application. But the idea is you follow through with that within that time. You can do that, and then there's that approval process, and then basically there's an approval, and if there's more information needed, they'll go through that and so on, and then you'll make the decision after that. So you'll have that approval, and then they'll talk to you about those next steps. So don't have that concern you're committing to the world all in like 5 minutes. You're going through the process. You're taking, as Susan said, those little steps. You do want to talk to your close friends and your family and say, is this something I should consider? And then take the next step. Speak to a course advisor, and the next one, just do an application, take the journey. There's no commitment, and the team is very supportive in that process and helping answer all the questions that you have. And that's basically the way to get started. So there is a little bit of urgency around in the fact that the intake's happening right now, and people are filling up into the 2020 intake. So our big encouragement to you is to take that little step of faith. Not the opposite of fear. If you have fear, obviously pray through that. But we're encouraging you to take faith, book a course advisory session, and you'll be connected to the right person. So there's different advisors for different particular journeys, and that'll all be made clear on this link. So here is the link. So what we're actually encouraging you to do is you can actually have Zoom's open, or this webinar platform open in one window, and you can actually go to the link in the other. So the challenge today is to basically start the process. So go to offer.aifc.com.au. It's free. It's no obligation. It's no pressure. Everyone here are counsellors, so they're highly empathetic and warm towards your situation, and we really encourage you to talk to one of them. So they are typically course advisors or course directors in different parts of Australia. They're the people that you're speaking to. So either pick up your phone, type it in. It's just the first step is just getting your first name, last name, email, phone number, and then you'll be directed to another page, and then you'll get an email to then follow you up for that. So that's offer.aifc.com.au. And we'll put that in the chat box. If Emmy is there, she'll be typing that into the chat box, I'm sure, and ready to have a chat to you. So that's it. Thanks for listening. We're going to transition to the time of Q&A now, which is a really good time. And we'll transition onto that. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Steve and Emmy, for your contribution to this webinar today. And if you just want to type a little thing in the chat box, I'm just going to ask the question as I transition from my slides here. How did you find today's webinar? And what was your big takeaway from the webinar? So as I transition slides to the Q&A, feel free just to type that into the chat box now. I'm just going to transition off of these slides. All right, here we go. And just make sure this chat box is working. So if you want to type something in there. Everyone's a little bit quiet today. Super helpful. That's good. Very informative. Very interesting. And coming in now. It was very useful. So these are some of the little things coming through. Good info. Good info. Insightful. Very insightful, I thought. I know the next appropriate step. Wonderful, great information. All right, so these are coming in now. So as you're putting in that feedback, and we're going to transition to this time of Q&A. So there's two places you can raise questions. One is in the chat box, and the other one is in the QA box. So I'm having a look here, and there's already some coming in. So I'm just going to ask these questions, and if one of the team from the AIFC would like to answer it, and you say, I'll tackle that one, then we'll just do that for the next, it's 1:10 now, so we'll do that up to 1:30. So one of the first questions here is, what are the entry requirements? Who would like to tackle that question?
Yeah, I can take that one. Thanks, Jordan.
Go for it.
So I guess there's two main entry points with AIFC, and the first one is the Diploma of Counseling. So that is open to everyone as long as you're over the age of 18. So no prior skills needed in counselling, no degrees or qualifications, just over the age of 18, and we'll have a conversation with you around suitability. You just need to be aware of things like having good internet access, and have some people around you who can support you when you have to do some of those practical elements of the course. On the flip side of that, our graduate diploma of counselling and integrated psychotherapy, you do need to have undergraduate qualifications, and they must be in either a degree in mental health, so like psychology, counselling or social welfare, or a degree or higher in theology-based courses. So they're the two entry points that you do need to have to get into the graduate diploma. Otherwise, we'd have conversations about suitability of the Diploma of Counselling.
That's very good. Thank you, Sally. Another one is Masters fee help approved?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Okay.
That's nice. As is the advanced diploma, the bachelor and the master's is fee help, and the diploma and our graduate diploma are VET student loan approved. So funding all the way through.
Okay, and there's one question or a few of them coming in about this particular webinar. So this is actually a very good webinar for anyone considering becoming a Christian counsellor, as you could see from the content. So we are going to launch this in then probably early next week, once we've done a bit of testing and set up, to have this webinar made available as multiple events you can log into. So just for those ones who couldn't make the first half or would like to watch it again, that's going to be made available to you. I'm going to have another look at the question here. Now, everyone, if you use the Q&A box, I'm finding it's much helpful if you use that than the chat. So I'm going to have a look for another question here. ACA levels were mentioned. I was just wondering where they apply in the course levels.
I can have a go at that.
Sure.
So once you've completed your Diploma of Counseling, you can be an ACA level 1. What you need to do then is to progress to level 2 is you need to accumulate 50 hours of supervision. And so that's not related to a course. So for example, if you complete the advanced diploma, you don't automatically become a level 2 at ACA. If you complete the Bachelor of Counseling, you don't automatically become a level 2. Level 2 is dependent on basically remaining current, keeping your PD points up to date, and then having achieved 50 hours of supervision. And so you can have a diploma or an advanced diploma or a bachelor's degree until you've got that 50 hours. You don't go up. To move on to level 3 though, you need to have a bachelor degree in some related mental health, counseling, psychology kind of qualification, or master's, and you then need to have 75 hours of supervision with and able to demonstrate 750 client hours. So the levels with ACA are more related to your actual practice. So you can technically become a counsellor, registered counsellor after your diploma. We would recommend that you continue your studying journey, but you can actually advertise yourself as a registered counsellor at level 1 and attend PD and get supervision, minimum of 10 hours a year supervision. We would recommend more if you're working at that level. And there's a scope of practice that ACA puts out that kind of touches on what you should and shouldn't be looking at the different levels in terms of your competency levels.
That's good. Now, just I'm seeing Susan's question. I'm 60. Am I too old to do it? And I'm seeing the responses here. So
definitely not.
People in their 60s and 70s are doing it. So any point on there?
We had a lady graduate in Perth a couple of years ago. She was 72. So.
Wow, there we go. So not.
She graduated the 3-year pathway. She did diploma, advanced diploma, and graduate diploma.
Well, I think Moses' ministry started at 80, so you're quite young in comparison to that. Some of the more technical ones is, can we continue using a diploma of a different uni, such as a VA or open college, if we want to do higher education? Domin.
I'll jump into that. If you want to continue on the pathway to the advanced diploma, there is a number of diplomas of counseling that are acceptable. So there's the AIFC Diploma of Counseling, the Christian one that we've had for many years. There's the current CHC 51015, I think it is, which is the Diploma of Counseling that we currently run. There's a previous version that ends with the number 12. If you've got any of those industry diplomas from the last number of years, then that basically allows you to continue into the advanced diploma. There would be more information on that on the Sterling website around the advanced diploma. It will actually list all the diplomas that are acceptable entry point.
Great. And for those who might need to go, just respecting your time, I've just put the link in again, offer.aifc. There's no cost, there's no obligation or commitment to jump on. with their course advisor and have a chat. So we'll continue going through these questions, but that link is now in the chat box. That's offer.afc.com.au. Keep working through these. Is there any electives offered to specialise? So this is about specialising in a particular area, for example, sexual assault or trauma.
Yeah, I can answer that one. So in the Diploma of Counseling, there are electives, but everyone's doing the same electives. And the reason for that is that we, you know, everyone's on the same journey of upskilling from those really core foundational skills. It's not until the advanced diploma and onwards that you do choose your electives, and you can start to specialise in whatever area it is that God's calling you to. So diploma, everyone's on the same journey, but after that, there's certainly many different electives you can choose from.
Thank you. There's a good question here, NK. As a pastor and church minister, can I start Masters of Counselling? So if you've got some kind of, I think it's like recognition of prior learning is maybe the term, or experience, you guys are the experts, but someone's is in that role, is it accepted for going straight to Masters?
So the only way you can get into the Master's program is actually through the graduate diploma. So everyone enters in the graduate diploma program, and we can have individual conversations about what prior recognition you could get for specific units, but everyone starts at the graduate diploma and then leads into the Master's. So it's a 2-year pathway for the course, but everyone does the grad dip first.
That's good, very good. Answered that live. Tick. Okay, here's a good question from Steve Crennan. What is the typical study load per week at each level? So, yeah, some of these practical planning things.
I feel like I'm dominating the conversation, but I can answer that one if you like.
You're on a roll, Sally. Keep going.
So in the Diploma of Counselling, if you want to do it full-time, we do say it is a full-time load, so you need to allow 30 to 35 hours a week. And that might ebb and flow depending on when your assignments are due, compared to if you do the course part-time, so you're looking about 12 to 15 hours a week. So that's the diploma. I might let Steve answer the advanced diploma one, but before he does, I'll jump into the graduate diploma. And to do that, you do need, if you're doing it 12 months, you do need to allow again that 30 to 35 hours a week. We do have an 18-month option, which is about 20 to 25 hours a week. So they are, you know, as Steve said before, and when he was talking, they are professional courses. So you do need to allow that time within to do the study. Steve, did you want to answer about the advanced diploma?
Yeah, I would say pretty much the same. We would be saying, you know, if you're doing it full time, give yourself 30 to 35 hours, just like you were working full time. And then part-time would be, you know, half load.
Yeah.
Okay. There's one question here about my Christian counsellor. As an ACA level 1, and do I first need to organise my own ABN and register a business name? Is that for
Yeah, I'm happy to tell. I would recommend yes. It helps you in terms of your you know, invoicing and such things as GST and all that sort of stuff, depending on how you want to operate, as whether it's a sole trader or with a business. But it's a good thing to have an ABN and business name if you wanted to offer your services online or face-to-face. So it's a good way to start. I would recommend yes.
That's good. I would like to do full-time, someone said. That's another question. Is there any help for practical work placement? This is a question from Bailey.
So in the diploma, and Sally, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the diploma, you don't do counselling hours outside of working with, outside of working within the course itself with other students, etc. In the advanced diploma, you need to do 20 hours of counselling with clients, and you have 10 hours of supervision. And so there is assistance. We'll coach you, we'll assist you in the process of how to find clients, but we don't have a clinic to which you can come and get your hours. And so we coach you as to how to find clients at the appropriate level, etc.
That's good. There's a question here, I think Nick can tackle this because this is about the AFC model moving forward. is there face-to-face class, or are they all online, which kind of goes into that blended approach? Do you want to just share about that model, Nick?
Yeah, so there's very much online. Everybody in a sense comes into one stream which starts online, but we run seminars every term. So there's 4 seminar intensives per year, and we highly recommend that you come along to those. And the great thing is those seminars run with advanced diploma and bachelor's and master's. So nearly every seminar you're mixing together with those who are a little bit further ahead of the journey than you. And it allows you to do your really practical assessments, and there's some intensive teaching and role playing and those sort of things in that face-to-face community. That said, we do go to a lot of a great effort and invested in the latest technology to use for online community as well, in terms of communication, doing role plays and assessments online. So I think you used the word earlier, Jordan, around best of both worlds. So we do the face-to-face and online together in that blended way, and have really invested in the technology to, you know, not just say community means face-to-face, but it often does, but to be able to establish and foster community online as well. And there's ways to do that where you can feel very much engaged and involved online, as well as those wonderful benefits, you know, face-to-face. And the ethos of this is that transformation happens in relationship, not on our own. And so we try to accentuate that online and face-to-face wherever we can. And we've been working at that and fine-tuning that over the years. And, you know, it works well, not always perfectly, but it works well.
No, it's a very good model, and I think they've found a really good combination there. So say that dealing with different training groups. Someone didn't quite get this. It's disappeared, the question, but it was around what was the minimum to start basically any form of career. So I'll hand that over to Steve.
Yeah, I just typed an answer to that one, and that's why it disappeared. I think from our perspective, the Diploma of Counseling is what will register you as a registered counsellor. And if you want to call yourself a registered Christian counsellor, that would be the minimum qualification.
Okay. Are we able to obtain a provider number at the higher levels of study? I don't know what that means, but I'm sure what do you guys do?
Yeah, with once you've reached level 3 with ACA, you can get provider numbers from the various private health providers. So each different private health provider would give you a provider number. So you would end up having a few provider numbers in that space. There is currently a commission on mental health in which there's discussion around the mental health healthcare plan and provider numbers for counsellors, and that's all currently happening. You can Google the Mental Health Commission and you can track with where things are at with that, but it's all in discussion at the moment as well.
Okay. Might throw one to Susan. She's been quite on these ones, so I'll ask you this one, Susan. Oh, you can talk? No, maybe she can't. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I can. Sorry, I've been typing.
You've been working this.
I've been answering.
Oh, good on you. One of the questions here I thought was maybe one for you. How does Christian counselling differ to biblical counselling?
Well, actually, I saw that and thought that's a Steve question.
Oh, okay. I mean, give it
So I'm throwing the ball that way.
Okay. All right, back to you, Steve.
Yeah, I think it depends on your perspective, I suppose, and your definitions of Christian counselling and biblical counselling, because on one end of the spectrum, you'd say that they shouldn't be any different. At least a Christian that is orthodox in their understanding of Scripture is the Word of God. But I'm obviously aware that there's various interpretations as to what is biblical counselling, what is Christian counselling, integration approach. You know, there's books that have been written that address these 5 different views of Christian counselling. And the one end of the spectrum, you've got biblical counselling, which may appear to primarily only use a biblical framework and therefore not engage in any of the psychology frameworks that have been developed, like various models of therapy that have been used, whereas Christian counselling would draw upon different psychotherapies and different models and use it use that where it doesn't contradict biblical truth. So there's probably some fine differences between what is considered Christian counseling, which will integrate psychological studies where it doesn't contradict scripture, and then biblical counseling in its, I suppose, in its purest form, which would only use a biblical framework without drawing upon any psychological studies.
That's very good. One of the questions we had a bit as well, not in this one, it was about challenges. Obviously, when you're working with lots of different Christians, is that theological base of things and the different views across the different groups and denominations. Is there a broad view on how that's tackled across the different groups within the broader body of Christ?
Nick, maybe Nick wants to comment just in terms of AIFC's position, but certainly AIFC has maintained a Orthodox evangelical approach and recognize that there are different different denominations and different interpretations on things, but maintaining the core of the Christian faith as it has historically and orthodoxly been subscribed to. And so AIFC would maintain that position and choose not to engage in the various distinctives that denominations may put forward. And so that's hence we are an interdenominational ministry, and don't align ourselves with any particular Christian denomination other than maintaining a sort of a middle of the road, straightforward Orthodox evangelical approach.
It's good, yeah.
And just on that, I'd say too, in terms of some data on that to support what Steve's saying, is that we survey our students a number of times, but one in quite detail each year. And our students come from, Anglican background, Baptist, Church of Christ, and different Pentecostal churches. And there's really quite a different balance. And I think the dynamic of that is such that it can lead to some really great theological discussions. But as Steve said, we don't sort of delve too far into that in terms of just getting into debates or necessarily going down that path, because we respect that people come from different backgrounds and how they express their faith. But there's really a very broad background of people from different faith expressions and communities that come and do the course, which is really great and quite diverse.
Okay, now I've got a question here and it's flagged that I'm going to read out. And we might make this the last one because it's 1:30. So we'll finish at this time. So 2 questions, please. It's from Mandy. Where can I find the award rates for counselling/healthcare industry? 2, is it important to really consider the model of therapy used when looking to work? For example, the groups in a hospital or similar where psychotherapies are used. Who would like to tackle these 2 questions? Sally or Steve? First one in. Maybe Sally? Yeah, there we go.
Well, I can have a go. Look, as far as the award rate, it would just be a matter of conducting a Google search to look that up. And again, as Steve alluded to, you maybe just look at counsellors, but there's also a plethora of different fields that once you've got training in counselling that you can step into. So have a look at those different fields. The second question was around different types of counselling. And I think that it's really important as you journey through the courses, if you're wanting to be a professional counsellor, so from advanced diploma onwards, that you start to get a real sense of the modality or the type of counselling model that you personally like and works well for you. Because if you can demonstrate in an interview that you work with CBT or narrative therapy or ACT, and I know these names kind of sound a bit foreign to you if you haven't studied counselling before, but you do need to demonstrate that you've got some modalities under your belt when you're looking at employment. So, and we teach all that throughout the courses, and many different opportunities to dive in deep and get a good handle on those. But again, it's just about learning those different models of counselling, so that you are equipped to help people in a professional manner.
Very good. Well, thank you everyone for joining. And as we said with the questions, I think that AFC have done a great job today answering lots of those questions, and on the chat, and also with Emmy and Susan and Steve, Sally and Nick on the video here. So yeah, so we just want to thank the panel for joining us and giving you their time in terms of running you through the considerations before becoming a counsellor. We want to thank you for joining. We've still got 72 people here an hour and a half later, which is, you know, over half that we originally had. So obviously everyone's very keen and taking your time to watch this today. And just to close on, there we go. I've just got to leave the offer there for a little bit more of a moment. Any questions that you do have, there is a team of course advisors ready to have a chat with you and go through any of those questions you have. They're very encouraging. They can even pray with you and anything you want. You know, their time is yours for 30 minutes and they're ready to do that. And how you do that, just a reminder, is you register on that website. You'll be taken to these different pages. You click on the person of choice, and I think some of the people on here may even be on there, and then you book a time with them. So book a time in their calendar, and I'm pretty sure there's an option to see people as well with video or over the phone, and you just have that time. So there's time availability there. Obviously around Christmas and so on is out of touch, but around that is available. So we hope you can book a time in, and they look forward to seeing you. So that's it from us. Thank you for your time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Nick Marks to close in prayer. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Jordan, and thanks everybody for attending. We greatly value your time and being with us. Let me pray. Father God, I thank you for each person who's joined us today, for that you know them so well, and that you know our hearts and minds, for their families, for investing their time and where they're at in their life. We pray that these messages may reach them, be an encouragement and informative wherever they're at in their life and the next steps that you have for them. Lord, we ask that you'd be with them and equip them and strengthen them, and that each of us can, as Susan said, walk in step with you and serve your purposes in our generation and honour you and the plans and calling you have for each of us. We give you thanks and praise today, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, everybody. God bless.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care.